Okay, Aldo, I think it's been wonderful the last 2 or 3 years that we've really been developing community ties. Could you tell me why some people think that Stoicism is very individualistic and why you and I would disagree with that? We think is actually very communitarian.
Well, people usually see things as they are, right? And since many people live in in an individualist society, they tend to read or to see everything from this perspective, right? And Stoicism is not different. In the case of Stoicism, is not different. So they have a very superficial lecture reading of Stoicism. That's why they think Stoicism is an individualist philosophy. It was not, in fact. We know that the Stoic philosophers were very active, politically speaking, in their societies. Epictetus was exiled. Musonius Rufus was exiled at least 3 times, and both worked defending the freedom of speech, libertas or parresia, right? So the reality of the ancient Stoicism is very different from what people nowadays think about it. It's not individualistic at all, but it is a communitarian and a political philosophy through which they try to defend the basic rights as freedom of speech, libertas in Latin or parresia in Greek, and also the fraternity of humankind, which both concepts, both rights are still very in need of defense nowadays, especially nowadays, right? And especially in Brazil.
I think you're right that Stoicism is no different in the sense that people interpret according to their own viewpoint. And they tend to think that because they are individuals and they live in a very individualistic culture, that the ancient world must have also been identical. And I find it very, very interesting that Stoicism was never seen as a self-help. It was seen as how to craft a character that aligns you with the universe, which is your community forms part. So basically, I always talk to people about the idea that to be the best trumpet player is not just to make the loudest noise, right? It's to play the trumpet in such a way that you play well and the orchestra sounds good behind you or in front of you, so that you do your piece well, but it must be so that the entire orchestra sounds good, because if not, you're actually not a good trumpet player. And I think that's what the Stoics say. Like, if you're an excellent human being, you're not just excellent in your own sense of self, but you're excellent because other people around you can also reach excellence and are encouraged by you. You might be a role model to them. So speaking a lot of role models, who's your favorite ancient Stoic role model? Do you have one, Aldo?
It's not a so famous Stoic. It's Musonius Rufus. For me, he is my hero because he realized it. He realized very deeply this communitarian aspect of Stoicism. First, establishing a perfect relation between woman and man in the marriage, right? Both having the same rights, both having the same perspective, and he tried to underline the importance of comradeship between woman and man, and between people in general, right? He thinks that family is as a basic element of society, and if this element does not work well, the society as a whole does not work well. So he tries to emphasize, to underline the comradeship between people, right? And something that James Bond Stockdale, about whom I will talk in Stoicon, also underlines. He says that the most important relation that the prisoners in Vietnam, which he supervised, of whom he was a leader, was the comradeship. He tried to strengthen this comradeship between his soldiers in order to face the difficulties. Comradeship, it's a different relation from friendship. Friendship works as a as expansion of the self, while comradeship is ecstatic. It's not egoistical. While in this sense, friendship is egoistical because it means expansion of the self. The comradeship is not egoistical. It's ecstatic, and for this reason, is altruistic.
I do like Rufus myself. I think you sometimes model yourself off Rufus, actually, Aldo, because you're quite strict with your students. Like, I don't think you let them make mistakes so easily. I think actually Rufus does this because he says things like, is it better? Is it really, things, to paraphrase him, is it kind to let people feel better about being wrong? Isn't it better to correct them so that they are right? And I think that's what you've tried to do for the last 20 years. You've been steering the Brazilian Stoic community into a direction that is more communitarian, that is more about building a sense of friendship or comradeship, as you've said, where we do lean on each other. It's actually a very active community. So I can see that you model your own behavior on Rufus yourself, and you have spoken out, and it has been difficult. Because I remember a couple of years ago, with certain a certain faction of Stoics who did actually go after you in Brazil because you were saying things that they didn't agree with. And it was a great sense of, for me, a sense of your courage when you stood up and said, you're not going to destroy 20 years of my work. I've been building this community, and you're not going to rip it down just because you've misunderstood some articles written in English, basically. So that was not very nice to see you go through that on one level, but looking back at it is wonderful to have a friend. I would really consider you my friend, as we speak very often, who doesn't just talk about courage, who doesn't talk about just standing by my side, but is there, who does stand by my side. And when things get really difficult, and there was a few months that were hard, you were standing up and you were being counted. And that, to me, signifies that Stoicism is not individualistic, because you didn't just care about yourself. You were really concerned about all the network you had built and all the values you'd instilled in those people. And you were very adamant that we should talk about virtue instead of virtue signaling, because there's a lot of virtue signaling happening as well, even from people on the opposite side of the political spectrum. And you were like, no, really, it's about virtue. It's not about looking good. It's about doing the right thing for the community. And it's just wonderful to be able to share that with English speakers, because I know that English speakers wouldn't have come across that reality that happened to you, I think 18 months to 2 years ago. So that's great that I can see that. I also like Rufus for exactly the same reason. And it's a shame that he's not as known. He kind of gets told, well, he's Epictetian teacher. And that's all he has to really, all people really say about him. But I think he is a very key Stoic, because, for example, he's around the time of Seneca, and he says no to Nero, where Seneca kind of lets Nero do almost anything that he wants. And people say, okay, well, Seneca couldn't do anything. He was in the position of power, but he wasn't as powerful. And Rufus has less power, and he goes into exile indirectly because of Nero's demand. And I think that's a really good example of how you can take an action example and say, you can try to ruin my reputation like they did with you, that you can try to ruin my community, but I'm going to stand between what is wrong and what you're doing to my community. And you can try to exile me, you can try to damage me, but I will be Stoic. And I thought that was just wonderful to see. Aldo, is there anything else that you think that is important for our listeners in the English language to think about when it comes to Stoic principles?
Yes, and it's also a good quality that I see in you, because Kai has a humanistic view of mankind. And usually people do not pay attention to South America, do not want to spend their time with talking with us. People, researchers, and they think it's a waste of time. They don't see us like humans properly, in the sense that we are people that deserve, that have something to say and can construct with them something new. They don't see us like this. But Kai has this quality. He from the beginning, he started to talk with us in the same level, right? Don't see us from top to down.
You said that you like the fact there wasn't a hierarchy, because when you speak to other people in who have influence, let's say in certain communities, particularly academic ones, that there is a hierarchy. And you felt that this was really important, that there was no hierarchy, that we were just talking as two equals, speaking both each other's language and trying to find out what virtue is and trying to build community.
And Kai is also doing a great effort to speak Portuguese, which is not easy at all. It's not easy at all to talk another language, right? And he's doing it very well. He can communicate well with people. People understand what he's saying. And he has this true love about other cultures, something that the ancients had, and something that nowadays is very rare, right? Usually, people from Europe or United States, they don't want to know anything about other cultures. They live inside their own cultures, and they don't care at all about what's happening outside. But Kai is a Stoic also in this sense, because he not only has interest about what's happening in Brazil, for example, or in Portugal, but he gets involved with us, and he talks with us all the time, not only me, but all the Brazilians also. So he is very open-minded, and he's a true Stoic hero for me.
Yeah. I think the key thing is that Stoicism, again, is a cosmopolitan philosophy. And when we believe that, we have to speak in different languages. I feel, because we've had discussion before, like, why do you make the effort to speak in Portuguese? And I've said, if I'm truly a citizen of the cosmopolis, there are many languages in this cosmopolis, so I should make an effort to speak more than one of them. And I think that's key, because when you speak a different language, you're not just using different words, you're thinking in a different way, and you're using a different cultural reference. And I think the Stoics understood this extremely well. And for example, we often think or in the contemporary sense, there's pushback against Stoicism because they say it's like a white dead man philosophy. But Zeno wasn't white, for example. Cleanthes wasn't wealthy. He was a boxer, very, very poor one. And it was a philosophy full of immigrants. It was people who were wanderers, who were really looking for truth. And it didn't matter which country they came from. They all came together to search for the same thing, and that was virtue. And I think that is the power of Stoicism, and it reduces tribalism, and it flattens the hierarchies, the social hierarchies that exist. And of course, we will always have hierarchies, and Stoics don't have issues with that particularly, because they just naturally pop up. But to flatten them where possible, I think that's a very Stoic concept, and one that we can all learn from, instead of shouting at each other on Twitter or demanding that someone has a certain identity politically and should think the same as us. And the Stoics said, well, it's not about having a certain political identity, it's about having an identity linked to reason, and to listen to reason and to work with reason. And even if your greatest friend says something that's unreasonable, to be able to say, actually, dear friend, that isn't reasonable, that isn't working towards a cosmopolis, actually that's damaging it, or that's removing yourself from it. And so that's something I think Aldo and I have been working quite a lot.
In a nutshell, we can say that you cannot be Stoic without loving humankind as a whole, without loving diversity. We cannot be Stoic without loving diversity, without loving humankind.